so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here in conversation with you. So I'll give you a visual introduction to the book as well. It's called The Middle East Crisis Factory, and it's a book in two parts. So the first half of it is an exploration of the recent history of our region and how we came to be in the position that we're in today, which is basically of a crisis factory, a seemingly perpetual generator of new disasters, and humanitarian and political and otherwise. And we basically delve into the region's recent history from the end of colonialism to the present day, and try to seek to understand what it is that causes this to be so perpetual. The second half of the book is solutions, and it's the beginning of a conversation on some of the recent changes in foreign policy and the directions the world is heading in, and ideas which could present opportunities for a better future, basically. So we begin with a chapter that we call The Unlearning, and the premise is basically that you can't just learn about the Middle East. There are so many harmful stereotypes and dogmas which are actively inimical to your understanding of the situation that you have to actually unlearn them first before you can begin to understand what's happening. And then we present the last century's history as a series of social contracts. So beginning with the end of colonialism and the liberation movements which emerged from the struggle against colonialism, a series of strong men and military leaders came to power across the region, in some situations actually placed by the departing colonialists. In others, they were the leaders of the liberation movement, so they took over from them quickly. And they created a social contract with their people at that moment, which was effectively, to simplify it, we're going to defend you against foreign invaders or colonialists, and in return you hand over the reins of power to us and content yourself with mostly silence about the political situation. And this state of affairs lasted for up to 2 or 3 decades, depending on which country. But as the immediate danger of colonialism receded, that became less relevant, and there had to be a new bargain struck between the people and their rulers. And this bargain came in the form of demand for jobs, employment, education, better healthcare, better government services, as these countries came out of, in most cases, abject poverty, to begin to, join the rest of the world in material development. So the second social contract was that we'll provide education for you and healthcare and jobs, and in return, again, you stay out of the political domain and leave that to ourselves. And again, this lasted for 20, 30 years, a generation in many cases, until the new generation coming up was reassured of these things. They were taken for granted. They were no longer requests, and therefore a new bargain had to be presented by the rulers in order to maintain legitimacy and stay in power. This third bargain was less optimistic and less hopeful. It came in an opportunistic moment as the world descended into the war on terror, and that was basically, we protect you from terrorism, and in exchange you stay out of power and hand the reins to us and remain silent. And basically you can see that each of these social contracts was an attempt to keep legitimacy for a small clique in the ruling elites. Each social contract actually provides less legitimacy and gives less in return to the population, and they became increasingly unstable until the Arab Spring, which was the moment of breakage, where a critical mass was reached that these authoritarians were illegitimate, and populations rose up after many decades of accepting that silence or being repressed. And then we get to the second part of the analysis, which we basically present a frame which we call the vicious triangle. And the vicious triangle is the idea that there are 3 major factors in the Middle East's political situation today. They are the authoritarian leaders, extremist movements, and foreign intervention. And these 3 present themselves as being in opposition to each other. But in reality they're symbiotic forces. Each one feeds off of the presence of the others, and the presence of the others gives it legitimacy. So we present 6 case studies from Egypt to Iraq during the 2 Gulf Wars, to Syria, to Palestine, and we basically show how for each side of this triangle there's 2 directions, and in each direction there's a legitimizing dynamic. So foreign intervention may enter the region under the guise of either being there to remove terrorists or to bring democracy and fight dictatorship, but in actual fact its presence will reinforce both of them, and vice versa. Dictatorship will legitimize itself as being either in opposition to foreign intervention or in order to protect the people from terrorism, and what actually happens is that it reinforces one or the other. So we go through a number of these case studies, such as Syria, over the last decade, in which Bashar al-Assad has acted out that cycle par excellence. He's fought this effectively war of annihilation against his own people in the name of eliminating extremism and extremist groups. That's how he's presented it since 2011, when in fact he's created more fertile soil for extremists to thrive than has ever existed in probably history. And there's even extremely strong evidence that he's done that deliberately in order to present the world with a binary decision between supporting Assad and supporting ISIS. So that's the first half of the book. It's trying to take this expansive view of the region and its history, and take in the major factors which cause the crises that are the air which we breathe today. The second half of the book is an attempt to get towards solutions, and what we do is we survey firstly the ideas which lead to the destructive policies taken in the West, either hawkish interventionism or support for dictators or appeasement. And then we look at a number of promising policies which have emerged in later years, in recent years, or even directions rather than policies, such as the idea of using targeted sanctions and smart sanctions against autocrats and their allies, as opposed to sanctions punishing entire countries collectively. Ideas such as taking affirmative action to support the populations in repressed countries, and showing how by taking actions which either directly punish authoritarians or give them a carrot and stick to achieve human rights improvements or provide support for civil society, what can actually be achieved is meaningful change in the long run, as opposed to short-term band-aids on gaping wounds, and how this can actually lead to a better world.